On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in October, a routine school day at Lincoln High School in Columbus, Ohio took an extraordinary turn. A police dog named Diesel, trained to provide comfort and emotional support to students, suddenly froze in the middle of a hallway and refused to move. His handler, Officer James Chun, had worked with Diesel for 3 years and knew one thing for certain. The dog never acted without reason. What happened next would expose a predator operating in plain sight, rescue 7 children from systematic abuse, spark a national investigation, and prove that sometimes the most powerful act of heroism doesn't come with words. It comes with 4 paws and an unwavering instinct to protect the innocent. This is a true story of how one dog heard what no human could and changed everything. The morning bell at Lincoln High School in suburban Columbus, Ohio had just rung when Principal Sarah Matthews noticed something unusual in the East Corridor. It was Tuesday, October 17th, a day that would soon be etched into the school's history, though no one could have predicted it then. Sarah was making her usual rounds, coffee in hand, checking on the hallway monitors and making sure the morning transition was smooth. Students shuffled between lockers and classrooms, their typical Monday morning chaos replaced by the slightly more focused Tuesday routine. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile glow over the beige walls decorated with student artwork and motivational posters. "Get out of your comfort zone," one of them read. She had no idea how prophetic those words would become. That's when she saw him. Diesel, the school's resource dog, stood completely still in the middle of the hallway outside Miss Patterson's English class. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed in the 3 years Diesel had been working at Lincoln High. The 2-year-old German shepherd, normally the friendliest presence in the school's corridors, stood rigid. His body was tense, his ears upright, his gaze locked on something specific. His handler, Officer James Chun, wasn't even there yet. "Diesel," Sarah called out, approaching cautiously. "What's wrong, boy?" The dog didn't move, not even an acknowledgement of her voice. Students began to notice, stopping mid-stride, forming small clusters of confusion around the frozen canine. Diesel had become something of a celebrity at Lincoln High since the district implemented the school resource officer program 2 years ago. The kids loved him, his gentle demeanor, his way of seeming to understand their anxieties without judgment. He'd been brought in specifically because the school had been experiencing rising anxiety and behavioral issues among the student body. Diesel wasn't trained for detection work like his counterparts in the police force. His job was therapeutic, emotional support. He was supposed to bring comfort and calm to the hallways. This wasn't calm. Sarah kneeled down, trying to meet Diesel's eyes. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" The dog's muscles remained taut beneath his thick black and tan coat. His nose worked the air methodically, and his tail, usually wagging with enthusiasm, hung stiffly behind him. His breathing was controlled but heavy. "Is everything all right with Diesel?" Sarah looked up to see Miss Patricia Patterson, the English teacher, standing in her classroom doorway. Patricia was one of the school's most beloved teachers. 30 years of experience, known for her ability to reach even the most troubled students. She taught American literature and composition, and had been instrumental in bringing Diesel into the school in the first place, having worked extensively with Officer Chun to establish the resource program. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted, standing up. "He just stopped here and won't move." "Have you seen Officer Chun this morning?" Patricia shook her head. "Not yet. First period starts in about 2 minutes, though. That's odd. Diesel's usually with him by now." She looked at the dog with concern. Patricia had a special bond with Diesel. She kept treats in her desk and often invited him into her classroom during lunch periods when students needed a moment of calm before sitting for tests. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was Officer Chun. "Sarah, I'm running about 5 minutes late. Traffic on I-270 was insane. Can you check on Diesel? He should be in his crate in my office." Sarah typed back quickly. "He's not in his crate. He's in the east hallway, and something's wrong. He won't move or respond." The 3 dots indicating Chun was typing appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Which hallway?" "What do you mean won't move?" "East corridor. Outside Patricia's room. He's completely frozen." acting like he's on alert. There was a pause. Then, I'm 2 minutes away. Do not move him. Keep everyone back. Sarah's instincts kicked into high gear. She immediately began gently ushering students around Diesel, creating a wide berth. Everyone, please give Diesel some space, she announced, her voice calm but authoritative. First period, head to your classrooms. Everyone else keep moving. The students obeyed, though curiosity lingered in their eyes. Word spread quickly through the hallways the way it always does in a high school. Within seconds, teachers poked their heads out of classrooms. Mr. Rodriguez from AP History, Mrs. Kim from Biology, Coach Thompson from the athletic department, all wondering what was happening with their favorite school mascot. Patricia remained in her doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to something else, something that looked almost like concern. She glanced back into her classroom, then back at Diesel, her brow furrowed. Sarah, Patricia said quietly, stepping into the hallway, this is really strange. You know how Diesel is. I've never seen him act like this. I know, Sarah replied. Officer Chun is on his way. The seconds felt like minutes. Students continued to pass, now casting nervous glances at the rigid German shepherd. Some whispered. Some took pictures with their phones. The normal rhythm of the school day had been disrupted by one dog's refusal to move. Then Diesel did something unexpected. His nose twitched sharply. His ears rotated, fine-tuning to sound only he could hear. His body became, if possible, even more rigid. His growl was low, not aggressive, but insistent. A sound of warning. What's in your classroom right now? Sarah asked Patricia suddenly, following Diesel's gaze into the open doorway. Just my first period students, Patricia said. We're about to start American literature. Why? Diesel took one deliberate step forward, never breaking his focus on the classroom interior. Then another. It was as if he were being pulled by an invisible force towards something specific within those walls. Officer James Chen's cruiser pulled into the parking lot at that exact moment. He was out of the vehicle in seconds, his trained eyes taking the scene immediately. Chung was in his mid-30s, with the kind of calm, observant demeanor that came from years in law enforcement. He ran toward them, his radio crackling at his shoulder. Sarah, Patricia, he acknowledged, his tone shifting into something more official. What exactly happened? He just stopped, Sarah explained. Completely froze. Won't respond to voice commands. And he's focused on Patricia's classroom. Chin moved to Diesel's side, his hand touching the dog's shoulder. Diesel, his voice was gentle but commanding. What is it, boy? The dog's response was immediate and visceral. A sharp bark that echoed to the entire corridor, followed by another low, purposeful growl directed into the classroom. It wasn't the bark of an aggressive dog. It was the bark of something urgent, something that needed immediate attention. Chen's expression changed. In 15 years of police work and 3 years of working with Diesel, he knew the dog's behavioral patterns intimately. This wasn't normal stress or anxiety. This was detection work, the kind of instinctual response that police dogs were trained to recognize and respond to. We need to clear this hallway, Chen said to Sarah, his voice taking on the authority of his badge. Now. Sarah didn't hesitate. She began ushering the remaining students into classrooms, her calm demeanor now masking growing concern. Whatever this was, it was serious. And somehow, a dog who was supposed to provide comfort and reduce anxiety had just activated something far more significant than anyone could have anticipated. Chen stepped toward Patricia's classroom, Diesel still focused with laser-like intensity on whatever he had detected within those walls. Patricia stood frozen in the doorway, her 30 years of teaching experience suddenly inadequate for whatever was about to unfold. Officer Chun, she began. What's happening? He looked at her, his hand still on Diesel's vest, and said the 4 words that would set everything in motion. I need to see your class. Officer Chen's hand remained steady on Diesel's vest as they crossed the threshold into Miss Patterson's English classroom. The morning light filtered through the large windows, illuminating rows of desks arranged in a semicircle, a setup designed to encourage discussion and participation. 23 students sat in their seats, most looking up with curiosity, A few with their phones still clutched in their hands despite the district's new no devices during instruction policy. Patricia stepped in behind Chun. Confusion etched across her face. "Officer Chun, I'm not sure what's going on, but my students are preparing for a discussion on The Great Gatsby. Is there a problem?" Chun didn't respond immediately. His training had taught him to observe first, speak second. His eyes swept across the room methodically, scanning faces, body language, the small details that most people miss. Diesel, meanwhile, remained laser-focused on a specific area of the classroom, the back left corner, where a girl sat alone, slightly separated from the other students. The girl was around 16, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore an oversized hoodie despite the mild October weather, and her legs were tucked beneath her chair in a protective, almost fetal position. Her name was Emma Rodriguez. Chun didn't know that yet. What he did know, what Diesel was communicating through his unwavering focus, was that something was fundamentally wrong. Diesel took one deliberate step forward, then another, his massive frame moving with the precision of an animal that had been trained to recognize human distress. He walked directly toward Emma, ignoring the startled reactions from other students who instinctively pulled back. A boy in the front row actually dropped his pencil. "Everyone stay calm," Chun announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling situations. "This is Officer Chun from the Columbus Police Department. I need everyone to remain in their seats." Emma's reaction to Diesel's approach was immediate and unmistakable. Her eyes widened. Her breathing quickened. Her hands, which had been resting on her desk, suddenly gripped the edge so hard her knuckles turned white. But what caught Chen's attention, what made his law enforcement instincts shift into overdrive, was the unmistakable glimmer of relief in her expression, mixed with terror. It was the look of someone who desperately wanted help, but was terrified to ask for it. Diesel stopped directly in front of Emma's desk, his body language shifting from alert to protective. His tail, which had been rigid moments before, now moved in slow, deliberate motions. He pressed his massive head against Emma's leg gently, not aggressively, but with undeniable purpose. It was a gesture of comfort and connection, but it was also a signal, a clear indication to his handler that this was the source of his distress detection. Patricia watched this unfold, her teaching experience suddenly feeling inadequate. She had taught Emma Rodriguez in her first period English class for nearly 2 months, and while the girl was always quiet, always compliant, always turning in her work, Patricia had never sensed anything extraordinary. The girl was shy, yes, but weren't many teenagers? "Ms. Patterson," Chun said, not taking his eyes off Emma, "I'm going to need you to step outside the classroom for a moment." "What? Why?" "Officer Chun, what's this about?" Patricia's voice betrayed her confusion and growing concern. "Please," Chun said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Just step outside. I'll explain in a moment." As Patricia reluctantly moved toward the door, Emma's body language changed entirely. She seemed to physically shrink, as if she were trying to disappear into her chair. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of her classmates who were now openly staring. The vulnerability of the moment was crushing. All eyes on her, all questions unanswered. Chun pulled a chair over and sat down at Emma's level, his body language deliberately non-threatening. Diesel remained pressed against her leg, a furry anchor in what must have felt like a storm. "Emma," Chun said quietly, so only she could hear despite the classroom full of listening ears. "My name is Officer James Chun. This is Diesel. He's a police dog, but he's not here to scare anyone. He's here because he noticed something, and I've learned to trust him completely." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her jaw trembled. She didn't speak, but her body language was screaming volumes. Chun continued, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer truthfully. But you're safe here. Do you understand? Whatever is happening, you're safe now." Emma's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Chun. She shook her head slightly, not in response to his question, but in fear of something beyond his immediate understanding. "Is someone hurting you?" Chun asked directly, his voice dropping even lower. Emma's entire body tensed. Diesel pressed harder against her leg, as if offering physical support for what she was about to do. The girl's lips parted. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. She tried again, and this time a whisper emerged. "I can't. They said if I told anyone." She didn't need to finish. Chen understood. His 15 years in law enforcement had made him intimately familiar with the patterns of abuse, coercion, and fear that bound victims to their abusers. "Is there someone threatening you outside of school?" Chen pressed gently. Emma nodded almost imperceptibly. Then, with trembling hands, she slowly pulled up the sleeve of her oversized hoodie. What she revealed made Chen's blood run cold. A pattern of bruises ran along the inside of her arm. Not random marks, but deliberate impressions that looked disturbingly like finger marks. The kind of marks made when someone grabs you hard enough to leave evidence. Chen's expression hardened, but his voice remained gentle. "Who did this?" My dad's boyfriend," Emma whispered, each word seeming to cost a tremendous effort. "He's been for almost a year now. My mom doesn't believe me. She says I'm making it up for attention." Diesel whined softly, his instincts recognizing the emotional devastation behind those words. The dog's eyes remained locked on Emma's face, filled with something that looked remarkably like compassion. Chen's mind was already operating on multiple levels simultaneously. He was thinking about evidence, about mandatory reporting requirements, about the legal protocols he needed to follow. But he was also thinking about the 16-year-old girl who had been suffering in silence for nearly a year, sitting in classrooms, taking tests, pretending to be normal while living in a nightmare. "Emma," he said, "I need you to understand something very important. What's happening to you is not your fault, and you are not alone. But I need to talk to your school principal and your teacher about this. There are people trained to help you, counselors, doctors, and yes, police officers. And we will make sure you're protected." Emma's eyes, which had been locked on Diesel throughout the conversation, finally met Chen's. "Will you keep me safe?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Chen said firmly. "I promise." Outside the classroom, Miss Patterson paced nervously in the hallway, checking her watch, wondering what in the world could be serious enough to interrupt her class. She had no idea that inside those four walls, a dog had just recognized something that she, despite 30 years of teaching, had completely missed: a student in crisis. And that recognition was about to trigger a chain of events that would expose something far darker than anyone at Lincoln High School could have imagined. Something that went beyond one girl's suffering and reached into the very foundations of how schools protected their most vulnerable students. Chen emerged from the classroom, his expression grave, and quietly said to Miss Patterson, "We need to call Principal Matthews. Now. And we need to do this very carefully." Patricia's hands went cold. She didn't yet understand what had happened, but she understood enough. The comfortable routine of her Tuesday morning had just shifted into something far more serious. And the dog who was supposed to provide comfort had instead become an instrument of revelation. Diesel remained at Emma's side, his job complete, his purpose fulfilled. Sometimes, the most powerful act of heroism wasn't a dramatic rescue. Sometimes it was simply recognizing that someone was suffering and refusing to let them suffer alone. Principal Sarah Matthews' office suddenly transformed into an emergency command center. Within 30 minutes of Officer Chen's urgent call, the small space that normally held nothing more dramatic than college planning sessions and disciplinary meetings had become a crisis hub. Sarah sat behind her desk, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Beside her stood Detective Marcus Washington from Columbus Police Department's Special Victims Unit, a veteran investigator with a reputation for meticulous work and unwavering commitment to protecting children. Officer Chen was in the adjacent counselor's office with Emma, who had been escorted there with as much discretion as a school setting allowed. The hallways were already buzzing with rumors. Social media was lighting up. By lunch period, half the school would know something had happened. By the end of the day, they would know most of the details, each retelling adding dramatic flair. But what started as one girl's crisis was rapidly evolving into something far more complex. "How many are we talking about?" Detective Washington asked, his voice carrying the weight of experience. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with gray threading through his close-cropped hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by much anymore. "That's what concerns me," Sarah admitted, her voice shaky. Emma mentioned she wasn't alone. She said there were other girls, but she was terrified to say more until she spoke with a counselor. She's been too traumatized to give us names. Chen added, from what she revealed, the abuse has been ongoing for almost a year, and her mother either doesn't believe her or is willfully ignoring the signs. That's a separate issue we'll need to address with Child Protective Services. Detective Washington leaned back in his chair, processing. And the boyfriend? The perpetrator? Name is Derek Stanton, Sarah said, reading from notes she'd hastily compiled. He's 34 years old. He's been dating Emma's mother for about 14 months. He has access to multiple school students through his job as a maintenance supervisor at the Community Recreation Center, where several of our students spend afternoons. The room fell silent. The implications were spreading outward like ripples in a pond, each one suggesting larger and darker patterns beneath the surface. We need to bring in more personnel, Detective Washington said, pulling out his phone. If this is what I think it is, we're not dealing with isolated incidents. This is systematic predation. He stepped out of the office to make calls, his voice dropping to the clipped, professional tone of law enforcement in crisis mode. Within the next hour, the school became the focal point of a full-scale investigation. 2 additional detectives arrived. School counselors and nurses were briefed on trauma-informed protocols. Sarah found herself in a series of difficult conversations. First with the superintendent, then with the school board president, then with the district's legal team. The question everyone was asking was the same. How many students were affected? The answer began to emerge slowly, painfully, as officers conducted careful, trauma-informed interviews with students who were identified as having spent time around Derek Stanton. By 2 p.m., there were 3 confirmed victims. By 3 p.m., 5. By the time the final bell rang at 3:45 p.m., authorities had identified 7 students, ranging from 14 to 17 years old, who had experienced sexual abuse or inappropriate contact from Derek Stanton over the past 18 months. 7 students, in one school district, connected through one predator who had deliberately positioned himself in spaces where children gathered. Officer Chen stood in the hallway outside the main office, watching as more police vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Diesel remained at his side, seeming to understand that his work wasn't finished. The dog's presence had somehow become central to what was now being called Operation Safe Harbor by the detective unit assigned to case. You knew, Chen whispered to his partner, stroking Diesel's ears. Before anyone else could see it, you knew. Diesel leaned against Chen's leg, his tail moving slowly. The dog seemed almost tired now, as if the emotional labor detecting human suffering had drained something from him. News vans began arriving around 4 p.m. Local news outlets, then regional stations, then, as the scope of the investigation became clear, national media outlets started showing up. By 6 p.m., there were 7 news trucks parked outside Lincoln High School, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like metallic flowers seeking the sun. The story was irresistible to journalists. School Resource Dog alerts police to child abuse ring. It had all the elements: the faithful dog, the dedicated officer, the brave victims, the predator, and most importantly, the shocking revelation that this was happening in a seemingly normal suburban community, the kind of place where people believed their children were safe. Detective Washington held a press conference at 7 p.m. in front of the school. He stood at a podium with an American flag behind him and the school's logo visible on the building. His statement was measured but firm. Today, the Columbus Police Department, in coordination with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office and the Franklin County Children's Services, has opened an active investigation into multiple allegations of child sexual abuse. 7 victims have been identified. One suspect, Derek Stanton, age 34, is currently in custody pending charges that will include rape, sexual abuse of children, and trafficking in persons, all felonies in the state of Ohio. He paused, letting that sink in. The cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, hungry for more details. This investigation was initiated, Detective Washington continued, when Officer James Chen's K-9 partner, a police dog named Diesel, recognized signs of distress from one of the victims at Lincoln High School. What started as one officer listening to his dog's instincts has led to the identification and prevention of continued abuse of multiple children. We are extremely grateful for Officer Chen's attention to his partner's alert and for Ms. Patricia Patterson's willingness to cooperate with our investigation. The cameras panned to where Officer Chen stood with Diesel. The dog looked at the cameras with complete indifference, his only concern the comfort of his handler. It was a photograph that would be in newspapers and on news broadcasts across the country by morning. Hero Dog Stops Child Predator. The headlines would read, German Shepherd's Instinct Saves 7 Children. But what wasn't captured in those headlines was a human cost. The trauma that Emma and 6 other young people would carry for the rest of their lives. The broken trust in families. The shattered sense of safety that comes from realizing danger was hiding in places you thought were protected. Back inside the school building, in a private counseling room, Emma sat wrapped in a blanket provided by a trauma counselor. Her mother had finally arrived, tears streaming down her face as the reality of what had been happening to her daughter sank in. The denial had cracked under the weight of evidence. The interviews with other victims, the testimony of Emma's friends, the forensic details that could not be ignored. "I'm so sorry," her mother whispered repeatedly, holding Emma close. "I should have listened. I should have believed you." Emma didn't respond with words. Instead, she asked if she could see Diesel one more time. Officer Chen brought the dog into the room, and the German Shepherd performed his greatest service. He simply lay his head on Emma's lap, present, unwavering, a living symbol that someone had been listening when everyone else refused to hear. By 10 p.m. that night, School Resource Dog Block Hallway was trending on Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. News outlets were calling it one of the most significant child protection cases of the year. And buried beneath all the headlines and the national attention was a single, undeniable truth. A dog's instinct had saved 7 children from continued exploitation. But the cost of that discovery, the trauma, the broken families, the investigation that would consume the next several months, was something that no headline could capture. And as Officer Chen drove home that night, with Diesel sleeping in the passenger seat, he knew that this case was far from over. It was only beginning. 6 months had passed since that fateful October morning when Diesel had frozen in the hallway of Lincoln High School. The investigation that had dominated local and national headlines throughout the fall and winter had now entered a new phase. Derek Stanton sat in a federal courtroom in downtown Columbus, awaiting sentencing. The trial had been closed to protect the victims' identities, but the legal proceedings had resulted in guilty pleas on multiple counts of child sexual abuse, human trafficking, and production of child exploitation material, a detail that had emerged during the investigation that shocked even the most hardened detectives. Detective Marcus Washington sat in the gallery, his familiar gray-threaded hair and weathered face a testament to the grueling months that had followed the initial discovery. The prosecution's evidence had been overwhelming. The defense team had essentially capitulated after the first week of testimony. Now came the sentencing, and everyone in that courtroom knew what was coming. Life in federal prison, likely without possibility of parole. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Patricia Hendricks, looked down at Stanton with barely concealed disgust. "Mr. Stanton," she began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "you have demonstrated a profound disregard for the safety and well-being of the most vulnerable members of our society. The 7 young people whose lives you have traumatized will carry the scars of your predation for the rest of their lives. This court sentences you to 40 years in the federal prison system, with a minimum of 25 years before parole eligibility." She paused, ensuring the gravity of her words penetrated Stanton's consciousness. "Additionally, you are ordered to register as a sex offender and comply with all associated restrictions. May God have mercy on your soul." The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire courtroom. Detective Washington exhaled slowly, knowing that while this verdict didn't erase what the victims had endured, it represented a measure of justice. He thought of Emma Rodriguez, now 17, who was finally beginning to smile again. He thought of the 6 other young people whose courage in coming forward had made this prosecution possible. Back at Lincoln High School, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The scandal, while devastating, had sparked a comprehensive overhaul of child protection protocols throughout the Columbus Public School District. A new position had been created, Director of Student Safety and Wellness. 3 additional school counselors had been hired district-wide. Teacher training on recognizing signs of abuse had become mandatory. And most significantly, the K-9 resource program, which had been considered a nice-to-have before, was now being expanded to 12 schools throughout the district. Ms. Patricia Patterson stood in her English classroom, watching her students engage in a discussion about To Kill a Mockingbird. The irony of teaching about injustice and moral courage wasn't lost on her. She had become something of a local celebrity. Though she was deeply uncomfortable with the attention, reporter requests still came in regularly, asking for interviews about the teacher who recognized signs. But the truth was more complicated than that. She hadn't recognized the signs. Diesel had. That realization had humbled her and transformed her teaching. She now included lessons on personal safety, healthy boundaries, and recognizing abuse in her curriculum. She had attended training on trauma-informed teaching practices. And most importantly, she had learned to listen more carefully to the silences between her students' words, to recognize that sometimes what isn't being said is more important than what is. The most significant recognition came on a cold March morning when Officer James Chun received a call from the National Police K-9 Association. Diesel had been selected for their annual K-9 Excellence Award, one of only 5 K-9s selected nationally. The award will be presented at a ceremony in Denver, Colorado, attended by law enforcement agencies from across the country. Chun had wept when he received the call, not because of the award itself, but because it represented a broader recognition of what his partner had accomplished. Diesel wasn't just a comfort animal who helped anxious students breathe easier during test season. He was a hero, a genuine, legitimate hero who had recognized human suffering and, through his handler, facilitated his rescue. The ceremony took place on a Saturday in March at the Denver Police Academy. The room was filled with K-9 handlers, police chiefs, and law enforcement officials from across America. When Diesel's name was called, Officer Chun walked his partner to the stage, where a presenter read the citation. Officer James Chun and K-9 Diesel, the Columbus Police Department, are being recognized for their extraordinary service in identifying and preventing child sexual abuse. On October 17th, this remarkable K-9 recognized signs of distress from a child victim that went unnoticed by everyone else in the environment. His alert led to the identification of 7 minors being systematically abused by a serial predator. Through his instinctive recognition of human suffering and his handler's willingness to trust that instinct, lives were saved and a dangerous criminal was removed from society. Diesel represents the very best of what K-9 law enforcement can accomplish when paired with dedicated, observant handlers. The applause was thunderous. Chun stood at the podium, his hand on Diesel's vest, and couldn't speak. He didn't need to. Diesel understood. The dog's tail moved slowly, and he seemed to comprehend, in whatever way animals comprehend such things, that he was being honored for answering a call that only he could hear. Back in Columbus, Emma Rodriguez watched the ceremony on video with her therapist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in trauma recovery. Emma was making remarkable progress, not because her pain had disappeared, but because she had learned to carry it differently. She had started a support group for sexual abuse survivors at her school. She had given testimony at the trial, in closed session, for her protection. And most importantly, she had reclaimed her voice. "You were brave," Dr. Mitchell said gently, as Emma watched Diesel receive his award on the screen. "I wasn't brave," Emma replied. "Diesel was brave. I was just terrified." "That's where you're wrong," Dr. Mitchell said. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear. You came forward. You testified. You helped protect other children. That's the definition of courage." Emma watched as Officer Chun bent down to hug Diesel on the stage, and something shifted inside her. She had been thinking of herself as a victim, and technically, but she was also something more. She was a survivor, a witness, a voice for the voiceless. The national news coverage of Diesel's award was extensive. CNN ran a feature story titled, "The Dog Who Heard What Humans Missed." NPR broadcast an audio documentary about the case. Dateline NBC prepared a full-hour special investigation. The story resonated because it touched something fundamental in the American consciousness. the desire to protect children, the recognition that evil can hide in plain sight, and the extraordinary power of those willing to listen to the subtle signals of distress that society often ignores. But perhaps more importantly, the story sparked systemic change. 3 months after Diesel received his award, President Joe Biden signed an executive order recommending increased funding for K-9 programs in schools across the nation. The Department of Education released new guidelines for recognizing signs of child abuse, and state legislatures began reviewing their mandatory reporting laws to ensure they were truly protecting vulnerable children. Officer Chin returned to Columbus a different man, not because he had changed fundamentally, but because the world had finally acknowledged what he had always known. His partner was extraordinary. Diesel didn't understand any of this, of course. He couldn't read headlines or comprehend executive orders. What he knew was a simple truth that had guided him that October morning, that he could sense human suffering, and through his handler, he could facilitate its rescue. 6 months earlier, a dog had blocked a hallway and refused to move. It seemed like a small gesture, barely noticeable in the constant flow of school life. But in that moment, Diesel had changed the trajectory of 7 lives, launched an investigation that protected countless others, and reminded an entire nation that sometimes heroes don't need badges or words. Sometimes they just need to listen to what no one else can hear, and trust that someone will be brave enough to act on that truth. As Diesel settled into his crate at the police station that evening, Officer Chin knelt beside him and whispered, "You did good, buddy. You did so good." Diesel licked his handler's face once, then lay down, content in the knowledge that his work had meaning, that his instincts had value, that sometimes the smallest act of recognition could change everything. And in a small apartment across Columbus, Emma Rodriguez looked at the news clip one more time before turning off her phone. She was finally beginning to sleep through the night without nightmares. She was finally beginning to believe that healing was possible, all because one dog had the courage to speak the truth that everyone else was too afraid or too blind to see. Sometimes that's all heroes do. They see, they listen, they act, and in doing so, they give the voiceless permission to finally be heard.